Hello and welcome to the Now Spinning Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston. On the next episode, I'm absolutely delighted to have with me Captain of the Lost Waves. This is the second time I've spoke to the captain. I'm going to refer to as Shaun by his first name every so often during the questions I'm going to ask. But the Captain of the Lost Waves is the artist behind an album that I've been playing a lot recently called Beautiful Ugly. Beautiful Ugly. It's an interesting title, but the music is sublime. It's uplifting. It just changes the atmosphere of the room that it gets played in. Welcome.
Oh, well, I couldn't have asked for a better introduction than that, could I, Phil? Sublime and changes the atmosphere of the room. We all need a name badge with that on, don't we?
We do. I mean, a lot has happened since we last spoke. And I remember when we spoke last time, you were going through the kind of challenges that would make a good TV drama, let alone a life story of your own. And much of that is still going on in the background, isn't it?
It is, yeah. It's been in fact, the album was born out of that experience, but it's incredible that the intelligence of the body manages to shut you down when it needs. And I suppose ex-war veterans or people who've gone through immense PTSD, however hard you think into action, certain principles that you think might calm you or relax you, you work at that. But it's amazing how when the body seems to take over, it says no more. And it shut me down momentarily quite a few times this year. And once again, in this last few weeks, it's been both intriguing and frustrating, but also you kind of got to go, okay, the body's giving call. I have to heed what it's asking of me.
Because I know when I spoke to you last time, you were barely able to almost play again, and you certainly weren't doing any gigs. But now, since I've been watching you on social media, you've been playing gigs and they've been really successful. Yeah. But how have they been? Have they been obviously very mentally enriching for you as a creative person, but physically, have they been a challenge?
They have, and I realized something about myself this year that I always thought I was fairly transparent as a character, if character is the right word, as open as I can be with my audience or with people. So I don't sort of hide behind some sort of illusory state. Like any musician or creative person, often we are sold a scene. Must be great, his life, every minute, even without an accident. But what I've realized this year is that I almost sort of reiterated that fact of being consummately professional, because I'm very good at masking the pain. And I realized, wow, I've actually masked the pain. So even when the physical constraints of the body were challenging me, there was still the beauty coming out in the music. So I thought it was like pleasure and pain on a concurrent, almost synchronistic essence with the audience. But I was going, and get through this, and this is beautiful, isn't it? And whilst the pain's asking something within the body, hence why the title Beautiful Ugly, because it felt like these concurrent things were happening constantly. And the gigs were kind of quite immense, really. Very strange, my shows always felt sort of slightly otherworldly or out of body experience, shamanic, I dare say. But these were more than that. It was almost as if like there were times when I knew my body was saying, I don't know if I can do this. And you start playing and there's a connection and something else seems to keep the pain just about tolerable. And then at other times, if the pain's extreme or there's a reaction in the body, it was like, this is fabulous. I'll keep referring to you. It's a bit like the demon and the angel on both shoulders. And one gravitate towards, it gives you that power and that leverage to keep going. And then sometimes the response could be instantly from the body. And other times it could be a day where everything sort of almost not completely closes down, but feels like it's closing you down.
You've just reminded me of something, and obviously I want to concentrate on the album primarily in this interview, but I've got a friend who's had a serious spinal injury and lives with chronic pain all the time, but they're also a very creative person and they create things out of wood using their hands.
Wow, right.
And when they do that, they don't feel any pain. And my question is that the music, and you know that with what I do here, my Absolutely. Slogan is music is the healer and the doctor. Has music helped you in a way that in some ways, obviously you've had lots of medical intervention here and stuff, but has music helped you on this journey of healing and recovery in a way that perhaps any other art form couldn't have done? Or
Yeah, definitely. And the strangest thing, Phil, if anyone can relate to this, I know a lot of musicians and artists who struggle probably with their own fragility, mental health, and when things can feel like you hit this existential void or a darkness. And we often have to overcome that sense of, I just can't do this. And you go through the pain barrier and you go through a sense of indifference that I'm really not up for this. Physically, it's asking too much of me and you're not enjoying it. And then you hit a point, and this has only been a recent thing for me. Wow, there's joy. There's a certain emanation of joy. I had to work through all those dead ends and the times I could just want to put the instrument down. But if you hang in there long enough, it will actually change its frequency. That's what staggers me more than anything, if I'm honest. And in all the times, and I go, I don't really know how I'm going to get through this, and then something shifts. It stirs me, and I find it's something you can't calculate, not mentally or intellectually. And something happens. It almost feels like something's always lifting me through it. That's the best sort of metaphor I can use.
The last album I really, really enjoyed and loved. This one has, to me, a very different sort of feel to it, the way that the songs segue from one to the other. There's a definite overall feel to this record. The songs are beautiful. There's a melancholy aspect to the album, but not in a negative way at all.
Yeah.
The way the music hangs together, the instrumentation, the sound design is immaculate. But your voice floats in amongst it, like a breeze going through a forest in a way. And what I want to say is that I'd like to talk about the songs, but lyrically, there's a lot of words in this, and I feel that usually with music, through the first pass, I can kind of connect to certain things. But with this, the lyrics are quite, not so much complex is probably the wrong word, but there's a lot going on. There's like I feel like there's a subtext living amongst every verse.
Yes, that's a great analysis. Somebody asked me this question recently, a reviewer, Colin Bailey from Rock and Reel, and when he'd asked me about why did words like Mount Kailash and the Nephilim and the Book of Enoch
arrive? Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, so he asked me, how did that arrive, Shaun? Can you quantify as to why you picked out those references? And when this process, always my process of making music has always felt like when it doesn't feel like me, I'm in the right ballpark. So whenever I have recorded something, go back to it and go, technically it may be superior to a take, and you go, yeah, I'm still too present. I can still consciously feel it's me. It's when I've hit a moment where at the end of a session, I've either closed my eyes or come out of it and gone, oh, it feels slightly alien, slightly disconnected, but in the best way, highly connected. So what I'd said to Colin was a lot of this album, like everything else, it can often feel like it's just a subconscious stream. And so when those words poured into me on that middle A, I wasn't even sure why I was writing those words. So in my head first, that can often happen. And then there was a line about, white feral girls absent of manners. And I was realizing the beautiful ugly, where it sort of started to formulate, was this idea of all these subtexts of my fascination with Mount Kailash over the years, or my fascination with Eastern philosophy and the great sages, and things from the Bhagavad Gita to early Christian mystics to pagan teachings. I thought there was a truth. There was a prism in everything. And it all seems to heighten. It became this distilled arrow towards everything. And something when I was making this album was, it was asking something of me to say, these are the words. And it was like, oh, I'm not even quite sure what I thought I meant. So I said to Colin, I can't quantify it to you. And this album, more than any other, it was asking words of me. And I'm sometimes a song can be fairly universal, or a theme in it everyone can get. And sometimes a song, there are so many different, almost modular elements that it's like your story, but not your story. And some idea of almost like collective consciousness that seeping in. So I couldn't really quantify to you exactly as to why the lyric in Beautiful Ugly became what it was, but it seemed to encapsulate my whole experience of making this album. And it remains a mystery to me. So whenever I go back to the album, or even someone who plays a bit of it, it still takes me by surprise because it doesn't feel like I was there. And I made this point about all the vocals. Normally I play a song and sing it live in time. So when I'm playing the bouzouki or the guitar, it's all, but this time I wasn't capable of doing that. But I thought, okay, so I'll fall into the moment and do a guide vocal. And there wasn't a single thing I changed about every guide vocal. Thought when I'm stronger and I don't have the ongoing costochondritis or the inflammation in the chest, I can use my vocal range a little more if I want to. But it felt like the hush and the static of the delivery. There was something about it that I went, do you know what? I don't think I can do that again. I don't think I could make that better or more meaningful. So let's stop there. And I didn't change any of the guide vocals.
Yeah, there is something about that, the kind of vocal delivery, the kind of nuanced, almost held back. I don't know how to put this into words. It's almost as if your delivery is restrained, but it's not. It's almost as if you're sitting next to you, yes, as you whisper to me these words. Talk about Damien Clark at keyboards and sound design, because was a lot of the music in place when you did the vocals? Because it sounds like you're just floating across the ocean of sound as giving you the space to deliver the words in a way that helps the listener, me, take on these kind of subtexts.
Well, what was fascinating in the process was that Damien, I, and Wendy, who made up the album, just the three of us, Damien said, any song you record and decide to send me, just send me you and the vocal. So everything was with the guide vocal when
Wow.
And then I wouldn't pass anything on to Wendy until Damien was sure of, right, I'm not going to change that because in records that I've made in the past, Phil, I've sometimes just thrown it out to the other musicians, and then everyone comes back with so many parts that you go, that's quite complex. I should have maybe thought about time management better. And Damien tends to be he's very pragmatic with his time. So he said, right, what's the best way we can do this? And I played him one of the first songs because he was a bit astonished at first. Why are you making a record in the wake of what you've just been going through? I said, I don't know, but something's asking me to, Damien. And he had this novel notion of saying, it almost sounded to me on your message like your future self was telling you that you have to do this. Think of that what you will. And then he said, right, okay, I love this song. I'm going to instinctively react to it. So that's the process. Me with vocal to Damien. Damien then came back with something. And the odd thing for me is, even as a songwriter, I listen to so much classical music, and I dare say ambient music, or so to speak, right? And I think because I create so much with words, my favorite form of listening is generally classical and spacious. I love the way that classical music weaves this picture. There are no needs for words. It's that powerful. So often when Damien would send the mixes back, he'd send a mix back with my vocal on it, general mix, and a mix without my vocal. And all I'd do every time was listen to the instrumentals for at least 4 or 5 times and go, wow, it almost doesn't need my voice, which is a lovely, humbling thing. But it was like he captured the essence of, and his ability to detail, but the spirit in his musicianship is astonishing, really. So he will go to task with it all, and he will not deliver something to me until he's sure. And the whole process felt meditative between us. Primarily, it was this to and fro, but it was quite magical. Yeah.
There's obviously, as you've mentioned, then about the way that the words came together, there is a spirit. There's a deep spiritual aspect to the lyrics, aren't there? In amongst all the music. And as you say, touching on lots of different philosophies and different kind of spiritual origins and backgrounds and stuff. I mean, I think when we spoke last time, this was a key part to you. I mean, and you've mentioned just about the universal consciousness and the fact that you're almost feeling that you're being directed to go in this direction.
Yes.
I mean, how important is that kind of spiritual aspect to your music and the whole creative process?
Yeah, well, I actually think it probably is a reflection of where my career's at, for good and bad, Phil, in all honesty. It's more in reverence to that, or that notion of why we might be here. And we're all perplexed by the human journey, whether you believe in anything or not. It's a perplexing journey for all of us. And it's the mystery of life that when you embrace it, and I said to somebody, the music is the stepping stone and is one of the facets of what I call that ultimate state. So it wouldn't be I don't sit here at night praying for a sellout tour, which might be nice, don't get me wrong, that would be wonderful. It's more about teach me that more. And if I can be humble to that, then if this should be more successful, be it on that sense of merit, in the maybe life is taking me a certain way. But I feel that a lot with, and I don't want to get cliched or glib here, but I feel every one of us is living a spiritual aspect to our life, like I say, and whether you believe in anything or not. But it's when the nourishment seeps out of the music into a place where you are so aligned with it. It's a symbiosis that's unequaled. And it's like, of course, I want the tracks to be successful. It would help me as an independent artist, but I'm not going to sit there and say it has to be this or it has to be that, because it's almost as if the reward is of an intangible level. And I've had many a spiritual experience which I've never been able to put into words and still can't. And some people could call it delusion. Some people could call it a state of mental health. You've got all these different sides and aspects to how people process what we might call spiritual. But to me, this record was a whole experience of a gentle, all-enveloping possession of the most beautiful kind, that in the most difficult ugliness of my day-to-day getting about with my body restricting me and everything else, this beauty just emerged and lifted me. And it was as if, like, if the record does everything or nothing, the gift you gave me in that exchange, it's a bit like a mother loving her child. A child doesn't need to be famous. She loves her child. A child is born from her. It was almost, without, again, sounding trite, it was almost that profound an experience for me.
The music is a very unique and special art form to us humans. I mean, because we need it, but it's weird. It doesn't keep us warm. We can't eat it. But it's something that really just changes. And I think that the way that these songs hang together, and the musically, it does have a feel to it. And I do feel that the songs, even if the lyrics kind of wash over you like a few waves to start with, and it's only maybe probably the fourth or fifth or sixth listen that you start to find that some of the words kind of sink in, and that it's a very profound album. The other thing I'd like to touch on is how it's called Beautiful Ugly, is how beautiful the package is.
Thank you.
Because not only does it's a tactile thing. And again, I think with music is obviously multidimensional to me, but the fact is supporting a musician in 2024 is about more than just listening. It is about getting closer to people like yourself. And the way it feels, and the way those of you who are just listening to this on the podcast, I'm holding up one of the most beautiful CD packages you've ever seen. And the way that the lyrics are done is these little cards.
Lyric cards,
Was because you obviously, were you hands-on completely with this design? Because it is fantastic, Shaun, it really is.
Thank you, Phil. I mean, part of the whole vision was that I wanted it, it almost sounds paradoxical, but I'm very much someone who doesn't ever buy into something unless I truly need it. And it's the same as the music listening experience. I'm not really a downloader. I'm not really someone who, I will stream occasionally, but very rarely. It's more that if I love something, I want to buy it. And I still have that. And it took me back to when I was a child, that when you saved money to buy this one thing, and it became like this love affair with this one thing, you would listen and listen and listen. And I think with this album, my designer, Jan Govey, who put the whole thing together with the photography of Heather Burns, we talked about this idea of almost like something resembling the beauty of a deck of tarot cards for the lyrics. And it was quite symbolic with the number 9, we felt. And then, how should we? Well, we can look at the photography. And I knew when Heather had taken this one picture of me, I went, oh God, it feels like something. It felt symbolic. It was very much Knights of the Round Table, something about the way that I was sat. And I got home and the photographs, and I thought, it's literally Sword in the Stone. And I said to Heather, yeah. And I've never had myself on the cover, Phil. I've never had the need to have myself on a cover up until now. And it was like, that's the cover. And Jan started fleshing all of this out. And purely by accident, because it was going to be a gloss design, and I've always been somebody who favors matte, but the company had sent me examples, and when I felt the soft touch matte lamination, that's that velvety. And I just said to my wife, Lucy, I said, have you felt this? It was such a beautiful sensory experience that then I had to go for it in that way. It's quite an expensive job to make, and it wasn't a job off the shelf because we had to create 2 slits for both sides. Yeah,
it's quite a complex design, but you're right. The tactile feel of it's like the music feels like the cover. It's kind of it kind of caresses your ears.
Yes, and I think what was interesting, what you just said earlier, being when I created Captain of the Lost Waves, I thought it was for all my cross-pollination, in a sense, that there's so much great music I've loved over the years that I've never wanted to be fixed into one particular style. I always wanted the ability to move out of those styles, but making them somehow still part of the same core of something. So earlier Captain records, some of them have sing-along choruses.
Yeah.
I knew that this record, and you've said it, you listen maybe the 6th or 7th time, the words started to. And I've tried to say to certain people who've followed me, this is a more gentle approach. You're not going to be singing along. It's something you have to invest yourself into. And if people don't get it first or second time, they may not be patient enough to go with that. And some of my favorite records, I've said, have often been what people might term difficult records. And they have a maggot melody, or they have a landscape in the sonic structure that takes you a while to unfurl it. Even as a musician, you're going, yeah. And then there's a moment when it aligns with you and something resonates. I think Jeff Buckley's album Grace was like that for many people, that they weren't obviously sing-along songs, but they're so beautifully done musically that you're going, yeah, that's it takes you aback. And then eventually there's something, third time for me listening, oh, that's quite stunning, isn't it? The musicianship of the band and the voice. And I don't mean a song like Hallelujah, which of course the classic Leonard Cohen cover, but I mean more songs like Mojo Pin, or the songs like Grace, The Last Goodbye, and they had this almost alternative rock dissonance. But once you uncovered, there was such a sublime beauty within some of these diminished and strange chord changes and shifts that you go, and I love that when a record just suddenly goes into its bloom, which you didn't see originally. And I think Beautiful Ugly hopefully has that thing where you'll only get as much out of this record as you're willing to invest into it. If you can't be stilled, or your mind won't sit, because some people say it feels like a meditative record and they close their eyes and they're nearly asleep by track 4. And they meant it in a good way, but saying it does something to me. It slows me right down. I said, it does the same to me.
Yeah, I would say there's a meditative approach to this record. And I would also say that you mentioned about there's no sing-along choruses. It's an immersive album. It's an immersive piece of art. And I was just thinking as you were talking then, there's sometimes when, if I'm trying to read poetry, for instance, there's sometimes it might be what's classed as a classic poem.
Yeah.
But my eyes almost get tired as I try and read it myself. But if I heard someone else read it out,
yes, then
I would probably just let myself fall back into it. And I think that lyrically, this album, because as we said at the very start of the interview, some of the words you've managed to fit into these lyrics is the kind of words that most people would have to rush to the thesaurus to even know what they meant. But But if you try and read, I was trying when I first heard it. I tried to read the lyrics as well as listen to it, and very soon I just put them all down and thought, I can't do this.
Brilliant.
And I just basically just sat and listened to the music, and so the words were almost on the first pass part of the instrumentation.
Yes.
Does that make sense? I didn't even bother trying to latch onto the words. I just let your voice be another instrument.
Yes. No, that's exactly it. And I know with the feedback from Damien, so obviously Wendy and Mark Tucker, who engineered and co-produced the record, and Mark's become a great friend, and he reached out to me through love of an old Captain song called Mr. Many Men, and he has a studio in Devon. He runs the Arc Studios, and Mark's done all sorts of things over the years, great musical ears. And he'd often say the same about, wow, this track you've just sent me, it's completely suspended my every, and he didn't, and again, I find it quite intriguing, Phil, because we've got instrumental mixes of the album now that are just happening.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I said I could almost imagine this album as a late night sleep therapy, almost, yeah. Or at least if someone wants 40 minutes of just instrumental, and often I would say, isn't it interesting that even when I was listening to the instrumentals first before I heard the mixes from Damien with my voice again, there was an encapsulation of something that was so visceral and a bit like the classical thing, where classical music hits me so hard that you go, no one needs to say a word because every note is being painted through the picture of the beauty of that composition. And it was almost as if, and here are the words, here's one human's ability to say certain things about his journey. But if the music got it right, and you're right, the vocals were almost floating on the top. They were almost, I didn't want to get in the way of myself. I didn't want to oversing anything. I wanted it to be something that was almost like something you could have on in the corner and listen to it closely, but it didn't intrude. And it only intruded when you were willing to intrude yourself. You had to make that connection with it. And I particularly find that fascinating because we can be so close to things as creators that that's the only adage I've used, and my judgment, because I produce myself in that sense. When you've got three people in a studio around you and you might do a take and people might go, oh, that's great, or oh, I prefer it if you delivered it that way, you bounce, or with a band, you'd bounce off them. So when you're working on your own, you have to be so at a point where, right, what's my gauge? My gauge is when I'm hearing something I wasn't hearing in the previous takes. Whoa, what was that? And I think every take on this record was either, I don't know if Success and Failure was the first time. Most of them were second or third time. But I knew that when I'd written Success in Failure, and it became like a dedication to my son in a quite an abstract way, but I'll never forget sitting in the outhouse at the back where I record these. Mm-hmm. I just sat on my own late at night, and I had an experience that I still say there's something on that track particularly, and it wasn't just white noise to me. And whenever I hear it back, it feels like something is pushing my voice. It's not just me, if that makes sense. And some people might think of that as ridiculous, but I'm willing to state that and say that experience I had, particularly with that song. With all of the album, I had it, particularly with that song, because it was the starting point for the album. It felt like a trip without having anything. It felt like I was in the midst of a psychedelic trip. And I felt what I may call an enveloping energy that was saying it's okay. The word I kept getting was trust. Trust. I don't know if I can do this. I thought, I don't know if I can trust. And I kept working through the pain barrier and trusting the process somehow.
The one thing, because I know you've mentioned other people who reviewed the album, and it's been reviewed in Prog magazine, and which is interesting that audience obviously are also behind you, because it crosses genres. This music, I know it's probably the most unprogressive album you've ever made.
Yes.
But the other thing I want to say to anyone who's listening and watching this is that it's an interesting album because you've mentioned it's 40 minutes of ambientness if you wanted it without the words on it. And if people think of that, they'll think, oh, it's something I have on in the background while I'm making a cup of tea, and I won't notice it. Now, this is what's interesting about this album, everybody. When you put it on, it doesn't matter what volume it's on, even if it's on quite quiet. If you've got anyone else coming round or in the room with you, they will say, what is this that's playing? Whereas you could have, this happened here when I put it on. My eldest son was in the room. He said, who's this? This is really good. And it wasn't on very loud.
Right.
So it's an album that cuts through without needing a lot of oomph to get it heard. But that's a good thing.
No,
this is music you can't ignore. But it's a nice, cuddly friend that comes up around you and sits on the sofa with you.
An old fan said that first time on listening to this. He said it was like a hug from an old friend I hadn't seen for years. And there was something within it, Phil.
That's very true, actually. It's very
There was something within this record that when I go back to, maybe it's the warmth of a lot of the synth soundscapes.
The
violin. It's like my love of people like Vangelis and Tangerine Dream. And you know, funnily, I did an interview recently, and I don't listen to, as I say, primarily listen to classical these days. Still certain albums, still things I go back to. But the last album, it said, what was the last album you listened to in full duration? And it was Vangelis Anthems. And that was intriguing. That was a few months ago because I listened to tracks and different things. And I thought it was really interesting, even my choice of where Vangelis's music would just send to me. And it was as if like everything and anything was possible within his cosmic intertwining, because such an amazing musician. And I think that you've just said, somebody said that to me about the one thing your music has never been is easy listening. And what I mean by that is that you either invest in it or you don't. You don't just put it on in the background. That was an old writer who said the same exactly as what you've said. And I find that fascinating because part of my challenge as an artist, I tend to find people that are fanatical about what I do, and they'll follow me to the ends of the earth because of what I do. But it's not easy for me finding lots of people who completely align with that and go, you know, I always make a few orders of something. If there's ever a great review, there's a couple, there's a few orders, it's a handful. It's never, suddenly we've got 87 orders. It's almost as if some people may listen straight away, might go, it's not the sort of thing I listen to. But if you're willing to embrace that what I would call composition musically with, I mean, one of the things that Mark Tucker said, the engineer, co-producer, said, I've never heard a record quite like this. As much as I've loved your earlier work, he said, this record, if it had the ultimate title would be Singer-Songwriter Does Blade Runner. And I thought that was wonderful because, again, my love of Vangelis, I just went, I like that. And of course, there'll be many people in the singer-songwriter world that would think of it as a bit too flouncy or fluffy or should be a bit more folky or a bit more raw. So exactly what you were saying, it's that thing, Phil, it's that thing for me that why can't we use a multitude of ingredients that make something beautiful? It doesn't have to trace the footsteps that other people have traced. Much of my love of people like Leonard Cohen and Dylan and, some of the great writers, I kind of go, well, we have a different palette these days. And I'm going to go, I love that. And let's take some of that and let's create the song with it. And certain people are so purist that they don't always get that. And that's the biggest challenge. And I've often said, all I ask for with people who come to a show of mine, listen to music of mine, have you got an open mind? Have you got an open heart? You can believe in all things, some things, or no things. Just are you willing to listen and just take it on the basis of music, not that it has to be a certain thing?
I mean, the album, as you said, I hadn't thought of it until you mentioned it in this interview, could easily exist as an instrumental version. So if you ever release that would probably work well. Obviously, being a musician now is a lot more challenging than it's probably ever been. Yes. I mean, one of the things that you've worked really hard at is building community around your name and what you do. And they have to say that the people that do support you, they are literally, as you say, part of a giant family, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, that's been the interesting thing is that when I've explored all the scenarios since the accident, and many people have known me for years, said if it wasn't for bad luck, you'd have no luck at all, Shaun. And you get these old, and then I look at how many things I have been blessed by. So it depends how you equate or you measure what success is or what. And the music thing, there's been many a person who follows me who says, they'd love to see me on the bigger stages or at the bigger shows, but they say, maybe that isn't your path. And hard as that is to hear sometimes, and the challenge of making money in music these days and everything else, a friend reached out to me recently and said, your music has helped me through such dark periods of my life that I think if you were much bigger, Shaun, I wonder if you'd reach people in the same way. I thought it was really interesting what he said. I don't know the answer to that, but I thought that's a really interesting observation he's made, that he can still reach out to me personally. And my fans tend to be people who feel that they can converse with me about anything, which of course I can manage because it's only a small group relatively of people that follow me. It's not Coldplay. It's not, if you had 100,000 fans mailing, you couldn't do it, of course. You'd have to do a general message to everyone. And I think there has to be something within that person that hears. I've seen it with young people. Certain young people have come to my music recently, other young people that hadn't. And you could put it in front of a handful of young people, and if they're in a different paradigm, they might just look away. And then you get certain kids who just go, wow, something really moved me about what you were saying earlier, and the way the music moved me. How old? At 16 or so. It's a range of ages. I think it's something to do, again, you've got to be careful of the language. It sounds a bit cliched or a bit, but I wonder if it's something just that I'm trying to give my most honest expression from my true, you could call it self, higher self, whatever, real self. And if people feel that vibrancy, whether it's in your voice or in your music, I like this, it's real. We're having a conversation between each other. Whereas people who aren't ready for that conversation may just shut down on that. And I know my stuff can be deeply earnest and deeply intense at times. And that might be harder for some people who might feel, well, this feels emotionally intense, I'm not ready to go there. I do have another friend, an old designer, Marcus Jack, who said, I felt things on this album that I don't think I've ever felt before. And I'm still trying to quantify what those feelings are. And Marcus is a massive music fan who's been into everything from The Damned to Whitney Houston. Yeah. He's a great artist and primarily into his post-punk stuff. But he just said, when he said that to me, I thought, again, to reach a point in 2024 and somebody tells you that you're experiencing something you can't quite... Why do you think that is, Shaun? Is it your voice? Is it the lyric? Is it the more acoustic-based instruments? Is it the synths? Is it a combination of all? I said, I've no real idea, but he talked about the intensity of it. And he said, I'm still trying to process what it is I feel when I hear this record.
I think for me personally, I think it's a way that as I said earlier, the voice almost holds back, but doesn't.
Yes.
Again, for those of you watching or reading, you'll think, what the hell is Phil talking about? But you have to listen to the album, everybody. If you listen to the album, you will have a sense that the music is obviously very immersive, but your voice, although it floats across the top, it's almost kind of like, it is like as if you're sitting next to you and you're whispering the message into my ears. Now, finally, I just want to touch on the fact that your community made this album happen, didn't it? Without them, this was crowdfunded.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And whilst I know, and I suppose other musicians and other people in all areas of life, Phil, will realise since the onset of the pandemic, how many things have fallen away, how many people have fallen away. We have seen casualties across all areas of society. The key word that seems to have come up a lot was how exhausted people feel. And even for things that they've loved, they haven't got the natural energy for something. So when I was crowdfunding, again, I almost felt it was like a real luxury. Like, people don't know if they can pay their bills anymore. And here's me trying to crowdfund. So there was almost a battle as well with myself that I thought, well, I could make the record, I could do it digitally, but I wanted to execute that vision, as you say. I wanted this album, I want this lavish thing that felt like a thing that was treasured and you could keep it. And then, of course, when I reached out to do the crowdfunding, again, they kind of amaze me, some of the fans who've been there throughout my journey and just how generous they've been. And, the last thing I'll say on that was a funny old quote that somebody said to me, and it's a classic, I think even comes from the yogic culture, which is like practice, work on yourself, work on your own internalities. and your internal state. The external happiness is never found outside of you. It's found within you, that we are creatures that are experiencing duality. And this yogi had said, never expect anything of anyone, and you'll never be upset or let down. And that's very true. And whilst I don't expect ever, there's a part where I believe and I go, they are so kind that will they come again? And then when they do, and it kind of, wow, you've still, because we are living in a day and age where we're saturated by choice and saturated by music. And I often say to people, well, it's what we need more of, whether it's like gourmet food or curated art in such a way that the creator has loved what they've given. I don't want to add things to the world that we already got plenty of. If I can add my own singular voice to something and say, this might be a little bit different to what maybe you've listened to, or you might enjoy it, you might not, but have a go. It's more that approach rather than, you know, we've had great bands over the years. We've had so much great music, and the hardest thing is finding your own voice. And when you can find that, it's not shying away from that. You have to be brave with that, because I know even through these challenging times, I've had everything from put a few old Irish songs together. You'd clear up. Maybe I would, but that doesn't feel like anything that's aligned with this journey. And I know Beautiful Ugly is a more difficult sell, Phil, purely because when people have described it as a communion or a meditation or a late night listen, it's completely this connection of, that's a harder sell than play this record on a Saturday afternoon. You want to hear this band 100 miles an hour. Yeah, give me some energy. Where people are exhausted, it almost feels like a slightly harder sell, but in a strange way, once they listen to it, they feel energized by it. So, you know, and I've been blessed by that, and I've been blessed by the people that have always been there. But I suppose, like anything, Phil, it's that thing of, I don't take anything for granted. So what we built up, there are going to be people, there's going to be casualties in every walk of life, and you go, will they still be there? And it's a question you ask yourself sometimes, and wondering if people still need it as much. And to certain people, obviously, they still do. It's not easy. It's not been easy at all, but maybe there was a way of having to carve it out and really work at getting this record made, because the easiest thing I could have done is not made a record at all, really. But something told me, you have to make this record. And regardless, like I say, it's like giving birth to a child and then going, I don't care if you're famous or not. I just love you for what you are. And the process of making this album is exactly that. I'd love it if it does reach a lot more people, because the thing I conclude with my music, and I concluded this some years ago, it hasn't been about me for a long time. And this sounds strange, but it almost feels like if it's in service or helps others. I often get emails from people who are going through really difficult mental health struggles, and they'll pick out a song, or they'll say, I've chosen a song for my brother's funeral, or, you know, I've had songs played at funerals. And I said to my wife, Lucy, I said, if nothing else, that is the greatest gift I've ever received, that a song has helped them through a certain time, or an album. And that's greater than any other form of, you can't monetize that, but it really, really is, I suppose, the ultimate kind of compliment, in a way, that my music has created a purpose that has helped a person through a very difficult stage of their lives, you know?
It feels special because it's a gift. It's validation of a gift that's come from your own heart. It's something that couldn't have existed anywhere else apart from yourself. So it's not like you've wrapped a pair of shoes up and given it to somebody. It's something that, if you didn't exist, then that piece of music wouldn't exist, and that person wouldn't have heard it. And that person was just at the right place at the right time to hear that music, and it has affected them to the point that they've reached out and said, you have changed how I feel. So it is a very special reward, which only a musician, I feel, can understand what that means. And it's the same as what you say when I talk to lots of people, that your songs and your music are like children.
Yeah.
You send it out and you don't know what people are going to think, and your skin is paper thin to what the kind of reviews you might get. But I think with an album like this, everyone should hear it. And the best place to find you, Shaun, is captainthelostwaves.com or Facebook or YouTube. Yeah.
There's all sorts of things on there, and of course Bandcamp.
Of course,
Yeah, and all the usual platforms, all the usual platforms. People can go and listen to the album, Spotify, Apple, all that. But yeah, there's tons of videos over the years. There's all sorts of things, so you can investigate it, decide if you wish to purchase something, and go from there, or listen to it all for free.
Well, as I say, go and stream it, everybody. That's the first thing to do. Go and listen to it. It doesn't matter what you're doing, whether you're making the beds or sitting down or ready to go out on a Friday night. Listen to it, and the music will just wash over you. But when I say wash over you, not because you'll just be concentrating what you were doing, it will penetrate your senses. And as I said at the start, it will change the atmosphere of the room that's being played in a really, really good way. So thank you, Shaun, for all of your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you again. The album is beautiful.
Thank you, Phil. And that was beautiful. Your summaries there have really touched my heart today. And honestly, in many ways, your use and term of language and the way that you've really got this record is quite a thing to behold. So I feel very, very honoured actually in everything you've said there, Phil. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, take care, and I'll talk to you again in the future. Thank you.
God bless, Phil. Thank you.
A huge thank you to my special guest, Captain of the Lost Waves, or Shaun, as he's also known to his friends as well. But Captain of the Lost Waves, the album, Beautiful Ugly. There's nothing ugly about this music at all. And as Shaun said, I hadn't thought of it before he mentioned it, that it could equally work as an instrumental album. In another world, it will be available in a media pack with the vocal version and the instrumental version available at the same time. But this is a musician who has built up his music, his brand, through community, through people who literally fall in love with his music and want to support him. They want to see him create more. It's interesting that this is in Prog magazine, because in a way it's so not prog, but there again, Vangelis, Tangerine Dream, but it's more than that. And at the heart of it is the captain's voice, Shaun, and the way he sings. His voice is unique. I don't think there's anyone else that sounds like the Captain of the Lost Waves. And the way he verbalizes the words, and there are lots of lyrics. And it's one of those, it's very interesting. It's one of those albums where you look at the lyrics, and there are some quite well-known artists out there when you almost hear them speed up to get the last line in because they so want to get that line in. All of these words, and some of them are the kind of words that I would have trouble pronouncing, let alone imagining singing, sound absolutely like they are in the right place at the right time. And that right place at the right time is this album. It is like literally you think, well, I could follow the lyrics. I'm just going to let this album wash over me again and again. And it is a beautiful listen. And I do say things like, oh, this album will change the atmosphere of the room that you're in. It's like it will cleanse it and, make you feel good. And I'm all about music is the doctor and the healer, and the healer and the doctor even. And the fact we want to almost like create a light in the darkness when we turn on the news. This album does that. And also I mentioned in the interview that it doesn't matter what volume you put this on. If someone else is in the room with you, they will ask who it is, because it's the kind of album that just buy it, stream it, then get a copy. This is a beautiful design, and this is more power to the CD here, because this is a piece of art, tactile, that brings you closer to the artist. Captain of the Lost Waves, Beautiful Ugly, out now. CaptainOfTheLostWaves.com. Visit his YouTube channel. There's some videos on there that are absolutely amazing as well. And Facebook. Become involved. Wonderful artist and a wonderful story. And it's a story about courage, determination, and belief, and in faith in yourself. So thank you, Captain of the Lost Waves, for being here with me today on the podcast. And this album is superb. So remember, music is the healer and the doctor. Please check out Now Spinning Magazine's website at nowspinning.co.uk. You can buy T-shirts just like this one at nowspinningmagazine.co.uk. Check out our YouTube channel, subscribe, become a patron, become a YouTube member, and get access to lots of stuff. Access to private communities to talk to like-minded music fans, and also invites even to the twice monthly virtual meetups for Now Spinning Magazine members. So take care, keep spinning those discs, and I'll see you all on my next episode.